You know, there's a specific kind of silence that falls over a room right before a bomb goes off, not a literal bomb, but the social kind, the kind that destroys your Tuesday morning and makes you question every life choice that led you to be standing behind a counter earning $15 an hour. I was wiping down the laminate countertop at Rusty's Outpost, a dusty little feed and fuel stop sitting right on the bleeding edge where the real town ends and the manicured, overpriced fantasy land of The Gables at Oak Creek begins, and that silence, that heavy, pressurized vacuum, it hit the moment the glass door swung open. In walked Patricia Vance, the self-appointed queen of the Gables, a woman who wore her HOA presidency like a five-star general wears his medals, her heels clicking on the linoleum like gunfire, designer sunglasses pushing back a wave of hair that probably cost more than my truck. She didn't look at me, she didn't look at the rack of beef jerky, she just marched to the counter, slammed a platinum credit card down with a decisive thwack, and barked, "Pump 6, premium, fill it until it clicks," and put it on the community emergency tab, and before I could even process the words, she was already turning around to walk out, expecting the world to just bend to her will because in her mind, gravity was just a suggestion and she was the law. I cleared my throat, that awkward little noise you make when you have to tell a toddler they can't eat the decorative soap, and said, "Ma'am, hold up, we don't have a community emergency tab, or any tab for that matter, you gotta run the card here or prepay cash," and she stopped, her shoulders stiffening, and she turned around slowly, lowering those sunglasses to look at me with this mix of confusion and pity, like I was a golden retriever trying to do calculus. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that burns going down, "I am Patricia Vance, president of the Gables, and under the community bylaws, section 4, paragraph C, local vendors are required to support HOA logistics during critical infrastructure maintenance, which is what I am doing, so turn on the pump." I just stared at her, blinking against the morning sun cutting through the window, and I said, "Mrs. Vance, I don't know what bylaws you're reading, but this is a privately owned gas station, not a clubhouse vending machine, so unless your bylaws come with a pre-authorized visa, pump 6 stays off," and that was the moment the air left the room. Her eyes narrowed into little slits of pure venom, and she pulled out her phone, not to pay, but to dial, holding the screen up so I could see her thumb hovering over 3 numbers, 911. "I am being held hostage," she declared to the empty store, her voice suddenly trembling with a theatrical fear that would have won her a daytime Emmy. "I am a community leader being denied essential resources by a hostile individual, I feel threatened, send officers immediately," and she looked me dead in the eye while she said it, daring me to flinch, daring me to be the kid who backs down, but I've been working retail for 10 years, and my soul calloused over a long time ago. She stormed outside to scream at the dispatch operator, pacing back and forth in front of her pristine white SUV, waving her free hand at the fuel pumps like they were instruments of torture, and my coworker Jules, a sharp-tongued Gen Z kid who usually spent her shift doom-scrolling, popped her head up from behind the slushy machine and whispered, "Did she just call the cops because you wouldn't give her free gas?" And I just nodded, feeling that heavy exhaustion settling in my bones, the kind that comes from realizing your day has been hijacked by someone else's delusion. 10 minutes later, Deputy Miller rolled up, looking like he'd already had a long week and it was only Tuesday. He stepped out of his cruiser, hitched up his belt, and listened while Patricia spun this tapestry of lies, claiming I'd verbally assaulted her, that I'd blocked her exit, which was physically impossible since she was parked at a pump, and that I was discriminating against the Gables residents because of socioeconomic jealousy, a phrase she used 3 times. Miller just listened, nodding that slow, patient nod of a man who is thinking about his lunch, and then he walked over to me, leaned on the counter, and asked, "Cal, did you refuse her service?" And I said, "No, Deputy, I refused her free service, she wants to charge it to an account that doesn't exist," and Miller sighed, a long, rattling exhale, and turned back to Patricia, telling her, "Ma'am, this is a civil matter, actually. It's not even that, it's a transaction, you pay, you pump, and since you called emergency services to complain about the price of gas, I'm gonna have to write you a citation for misuse of 911. You'd think that would be the end of it, you'd think the shame of getting a ticket while standing in your Gucci loafers would send a normal person scurrying home to rethink their life choices, but Patricia Vance wasn't normal, she was a hurricane in a blazer, and as she drove away, snatching that ticket from Miller's hand. She didn't look defeated, she looked inspired, like she had just found a new hobby, and that hobby was destroying me. "This isn't over," she screamed out the window. "The Gables will not support a business that attacks its leadership," and Jules, sipping a blue raspberry slushie, muttered, "We are so screwed," and she was right, because the next morning, the siege began. I pulled into the lot at 6 a.m. and there were already 4 SUVs parked horizontally across the entrance, creating a blockade of beige leather and polished chrome, and standing in front of them were 6 women, the Gables Community Standards Committee, holding signs that looked like they'd been printed at a professional shop overnight, glossy, high-resolution signs reading, "Rusty's Outpost supports discrimination," and "Protect our neighborhood from predatory pricing," and in the middle of them was Patricia, holding a megaphone, directing traffic away from our store, literally stepping into the road to wave cars past, shouting, "Drive on. Do not support the tyrants. Justice for the Gables." It was absurd, it was laughable, but it was also effective, because people in this town hate confrontation, so they just kept driving, and by noon, the store was a ghost town, just me, Jules, and the hum of the refrigerators. Jules was on her phone, tapping away furiously, and when I asked her what she was doing, she said, "I'm fighting fire with fire, Cal." Patricia thinks she controls the narrative because she has a newsletter, but I have the internet, and she showed me she was live streaming the whole thing on the town's community subreddit, captioning it, "HOA President creates a legal roadblock because she didn't want to pay for premium." And the comments were already rolling in, mostly people laughing, but Patricia didn't care about the internet, she cared about physical territory. Then came the inspectors, 2 guys in cheap suits who walked in around 2 p.m., claiming they were from the Tri-County Commerce Oversight Board, demanding to see our fuel tank calibration records, our employee hygiene logs, and our structural integrity permits, and I knew immediately they were bogus, probably some paralegals from whatever law firm the Gables kept on retainer to bully contractors. They started poking around, taking photos of dust bunnies in the corner, writing things down on clipboards with this exaggerated shaking of heads, trying to rattle me, trying to find anything they could use to shut us down, and I started to feel that heat rising in my chest, that feeling of being cornered by people who have more money than morals. But Jules, bless her heart, she didn't flinch, she just walked out from behind the counter with her phone held high, recording them, and said, "Gentlemen, just so you know, according to state law, impersonating a government official is a felony, and since I've never heard of the Tri-County Commerce Oversight Board, I'm live streaming this to the Sheriff's Department right now to verify your credentials. And you have never seen 2 men move faster," they mumbled something about preliminary surveys, and scrambled out the door like roaches when the lights come on, jumping into a sedan that sped off toward the Gables. We thought we'd won a round, but Patricia was escalating, she was outside screaming about sanitary violations, now, claiming she saw rats, which was a lie, the only rats were the ones she hired, and then, around 4 p.m., a black town car pulled up, sleek and dark, slicing through the line of protesting SUVs like a shark through a school of fish. The crowd quieted down, Patricia lowered her megaphone, looking suddenly nervous, and out stepped Councilman Holloway, the guy who basically ran the zoning board, a man with a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo, and right behind him was Deputy Miller again, looking even more tired than yesterday. Patricia rushed over to Holloway, putting on her victim face instantly, "Councilman. Thank God you're here, this establishment is a blight, they are harassing residents, they are refusing service based on zip codes, we need their business license revoked immediately," and Holloway just stood there, smoothing his tie, looking from the screaming women to the empty gas pumps, and then he looked at me standing in the doorway with my arms crossed, and he walked over, bypassing Patricia completely. "Calvin," Holloway said, extending a hand, "rough couple of days," and I shook it, saying, "You could say that, Councilman, seems my debit card machine violated the HOA Constitution," and Holloway chuckled, a dry sound, then he turned to Patricia, who was vibrating with indignation, and said, "Patricia, I need you to clear these cars, you're blocking a county road access point, and frankly, my office is getting flooded with calls from people who can't get to work because of your little blockade. It's a protest." Patricia shrieked, her composure cracking, "It is our First Amendment right. We are taking a stand against corporate greed. You're blocking a gas station because you wanted a free tank of gas, Patty, a voice boomed from the back of the crowd, and everyone turned to see a man stepping out of a Ford F-150 that had just pulled up. It was Mr. Henderson, the treasurer of the Gables HOA, a quiet guy who usually just nodded along at meetings, but today he looked furious, holding a stack of papers in his hand. "I checked the logs, Patricia," Henderson shouted, walking right past the protesters who parted like the Red Sea. "I checked the emergency infrastructure bylaws you keep quoting, they don't exist, and I also checked the HOA credit card statements." The color drained from Patricia's face so fast she looked like a sheet of drywall, and she stammered, "This is neither the time nor the place, verify this at the monthly meeting." But Henderson wasn't stopping, he marched right up to Holloway and the deputy, handing them the papers. "She's been charging her personal fuel, her dry cleaning, and apparently her wine club subscription to the Community Emergency Fund for 3 years, Henderson announced, loud enough for the entire parking lot to hear, "and this stunt. This protest. She spent $2,000 of our dues printing these signs without board approval." The silence that followed was heavy, total, and absolute, the kind of silence where you can hear a reputation shattering into a million pieces. The women holding the signs slowly lowered them, looking at each other, realizing they hadn't been fighting for justice, they'd been foot soldiers in a grifter's ego trip. Patricia looked around, her eyes wild, realizing the ground was crumbling beneath her heels, and she did the only thing a narcissist knows how to do when cornered, she attacked. "You are all conspiring against me," she screamed, her voice cracking, pointing a manicured finger at me, at Henderson, at Holloway. "I am the only thing holding that community together. I protect property values. I keep the riffraff out. If you remove me, the Gables will be nothing but a slum within a year. I am the president. I am the law." "Not anymore, ma'am," Deputy Miller said, stepping forward with his handcuffs unclipped from his belt, "because apart from the fraud Mr. Henderson is alleging, which is a felony, you're currently trespassing, disturbing the peace, and inciting a riot, and I'm done writing citations." Watching Deputy Miller slap the cuffs on Patricia Vance was like watching a slow-motion car crash that you couldn't look away from. There was this surreal disconnect between her pristine, tailored blazer and the cold, industrial steel of the handcuffs, and as he read her rights, she wasn't screaming anymore, she was just making this low, keening sound of disbelief. Like her brain physically couldn't process a reality where she wasn't in charge. The Community Standards Committee, those loyal soldiers who had been blocking my pumps 20 minutes ago, were now scattering like leaves in the wind, tossing their glossy protest signs into the ditch and power-walking back to their SUVs, desperate to disassociate themselves from the sinking ship. Councilman Holloway watched the squad car pull away with Patricia in the back, then he turned to me and sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. "Calvin, on behalf of the town, I apologize for the circus. I had no idea the rot went that deep until Henderson called me this morning," and I just nodded, leaning against the doorframe, feeling the adrenaline dump leave my knees shaky. "Just glad it's over, Councilman," I said, "I just want to sell gas and jerky, I don't need a crown." Henderson, the treasurer who had just nuked the Queen, walked up to me, looking uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. She told us you threatened her," he said quietly. "She told the board you came at her with a tire iron, that's why we authorized the protest funds. We didn't know it was just that she didn't want to pay." I looked at this man, a grown adult who had let himself be bullied into a mob mentality by a woman with a clipboard, and I felt a flash of anger, but then it just turned into pity. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "maybe next time, ask for the security footage before you declare war on a convenience store." The next few days were a blur of weird energy. The story hit the local news, then the state news, and suddenly Rusty's Outpost was a minor tourist attraction, people coming in to buy a soda just to ask, "Is this where the HOA lady got arrested?" And Jules was loving it, selling "I Survived the Gables" t-shirts she made on her iron-on machine in the back room. We were vindicated, we were the heroes of the working class for about 15 minutes, but the real twist, the thing that sticks with me, happened about a week later. It was a Tuesday evening, quiet, the sun dipping low and painting the sky that bruised purple color, and a car pulled in, not a luxury SUV, but an older sedan, driven by a guy I recognized as Patricia's husband, a man who usually looked like a ghost in his own life, silent and fading into the background. He walked in, looking tired, looking like he'd aged 10 years in 10 days, and he placed an envelope on the counter. "For the trouble," he said, his voice raspy, "and for the damage to your business." I opened it. It was a cashier's check for $5,000, drawn from a personal account, not the HOA's. "Mr. Vance, you don't have to do this," I started, but he held up a hand. She's getting help, Cal," he said, staring at the floor. It wasn't just the gas. It was everything. She felt like she was losing control of her life, felt like she was becoming invisible as she got older, and the only way she knew how to exist was to force people to look at her, to force them to obey. Doesn't make it right, but she's not a monster, she's just broken. He walked out before I could say anything else, and I stood there holding that check, thinking about Patricia Vance, not as the screaming tyrant with the megaphone, but as a woman so terrified of being irrelevant that she burned her entire world down just to feel the heat. It's easy to hate the Karens, right? It's easy to laugh at them, to film them, to turn them into content, and don't get me wrong, she deserved what she got. Actions have consequences, and you can't stomp on people just because you think you're better than them. But as I locked up the store that night, turning off the neon sign, watching the lights of the gables twinkle on the hill, a little less bright now, a little less perfect, I realized that power is a funny thing. Some people use it to build things up, and some people use it like a shield to hide how small they really feel inside. I walked to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots, taking a deep breath of the cool night air, grateful for the silence, the real silence, not the tension before a bomb, but the peace that comes after the storm has finally blown itself out. So, tell me, have you ever had to deal with someone like Patricia? Someone who thought their title gave them the right to rewrite reality? Or maybe you've been the Mr. Henderson, watching it happen and staying silent too long. Drop a comment below. I want to hear your war stories, because if there's one thing I learned at Rusty's Outpost, it's that everybody is fighting a battle you know nothing about, but that doesn't mean they get free gas. Stay safe out there, folks, and always, always get a receipt.